Hi everyone, let's begin with chapter 1, which is summarizing and exploring data. In this lesson, we're going to look at exploring and understanding data. Okay, so first off, what is statistics? And in its most basic form, it's the study of the world around us. We look at it as a way of reasoning along with tools and methods that can help us to understand the world. When we ask what are statistics, the plural, we're looking at specific calculations made from data. So statistics, not the actual subject, but the calculations could be averages, which is also known as the mean. And we're going to look at, how important the mean is. It's a measure of central tendency. We can look at standard deviation, which is a measure of spread, how the data is spread out and how each data point varies from the mean. And of course, we can look at mode and median and all other types of measures of center, as well as another measure of spread in addition to the standard deviation, which could be range, which is something that you're probably familiar with. Okay, when we say data or data, it's thought of as a collection of numbers, images, characters, and other items that provide information about something. If you've ever gone online to order something from, let's say, Amazon, more than likely you've had to fill out information like your address and other pertinent information. All of that is considered data. Okay, and statistics helps us to be able to look at that data and answer questions about the data that maybe we can't see, right off the bat. Statistics is broken down into two branches, basically. We have descriptive statistics, which literally help us to describe or show or summarize data in a meaningful way. We do that by using tables, constructing graphs, calculating those statistics. And then we also have another branch of statistics, which is called inferential statistics, which is where we take data from a sample and we use that data to make generalizations about the population from which the sample is taken. Inferential statistics is used to estimate properties about a population. Populations sometimes tend to be too big, so we need to look at correct ways of taking samples. And as long as we take samples correctly and we don't have bias within our samples, we can find out a lot of information about a population. Okay, let's look at some data. So here's a table of values. Can you guess what they represent? So pause the video and try to figure out what you think it is. If you're having a difficult time figuring out what it is, that's because it's missing some information. We don't have any context here. So we don't know what these letters and numbers and words represent. And it actually represents diamonds. Okay. Each of these numbers to the left represent the rows. And then I've got, row number. Next to it, I have the carat size. And then the cut, the color, the depth, depth should be the next one. This is clarity, depth. And then we have a table, so the table that this information was taken from, and then the price. Okay, so we would find it difficult to determine what those values represent because there's no context. Okay. So without context, we don't know what the values are measured and what's measured about them. Okay? So context is very important. In order for the meaning to be clear, we need to organize our data. And we like to organize in table form. So you can see here, now we have this top row telling us what each of those columns represents. And one of the things we like to determine about our data are the 5 W's and then also the H, okay? So the W's are the who, what, where, when, and why. And then of course we always want to know how. The two beginning words, who and what, are the most important. So who is referring to, the individuals about which we record characteristics. The who could be people, plants, animals, websites, companies, etc. Okay. The who refers to the rows of the table. And then the what are the characteristics, or we like to call them variables in statistics, that are recorded about each individual. So the what are the columns of the table. So for instance, if you look at row number 1, we can see that row there is the who would be a diamond, right? There are specific characteristics about diamonds. And each of those columns, carat, cut, color, clarity, depth, table, price, they're all variables. And we divide our variables into two types. We've got categorical and we have quantitative. Okay, categorical refers to categories and quantitative refers to numbers. The when, where, why, and how are also important to take a look at. So the when is important at times. We want to know when the data was recorded. Okay, sometimes it's not specified, but if we're trying to find information about something that is happening now, we may want to find data that's closer to the year that we're in, as opposed to finding data, in the 1950s. Okay, or maybe data in the 1950s would be helpful. So the when is important. Where were the measurements taken or the values recorded is important. What kind of tools did they use? How did they measure it? Why did they collect the data? If possible, sometimes, you won't know the reason. And how were the data collected? So feel free to pause the video now and read number 3, and then see if you can identify the W's, and then unpause when you're ready to work out the answer with me. One focus of teacher preparation reform over the last 2 decades has been about helping teachers meet the needs of increasingly diverse student populations. This table displays pre-service coursework completed by U.S. private and public school teachers. It uses data from the 2017-2018 National Teacher and Principal Survey, or the NTPS. It's a national sample survey of public and private K-12 schools, principals, and teachers. This data examines pre-service coursework on different education topics and includes 3 areas of study about meeting diverse student needs in the classroom. So, can you identify the W's? Okay, so if we're looking at this table here, who are the characteristics about? So if I look at each of the rows, okay, the rows are giving us the schools, but each of those numbers there would be referring to a percentage of teachers, right? So if I look at the first row where it says all schools, 72.4% of teachers took classroom management techniques. 77% of teachers do lesson planning. 75.1% of teachers use learning assessments. So each of those percentages is referring to the teachers at those schools. So the who would be the teachers. Okay? Remember, the who are the rows. Okay, what are the characteristics about the teachers that they're looking at? Those would be each of the columns. So we're looking at classroom management techniques. We've got lesson planning. We've got learning assessment, and so on. Okay, so it's all the columns. When was this data collected? If you go back to the problem, it says 2017, 2018. Where did they collect the data? This was a national survey, so nationwide. Okay, why was the data collected? So they told us in the problem it was to study teacher preparation. And how did they collect the data? They collected it through a survey. Now, of those, the categories in the what section, right? The what are our variables, and they are taken from the columns. There's two types of variables we're going to look at. We have quantitative, which refers to numbers with their labels, and categorical, which are categories, like colors as a category. Okay. Quantitative variables are numerical measures or counts, and they will have units. Okay, there's actually two types of quantitative variables. We have what's called a discrete variable, and discrete variables are just countable. So if you can count it, it's discrete. And the other type of quantitative variable is continuous, okay, and they take on any value in an interval. So for example, an example of discrete could be I give you a pack of Skittles and I ask you how many red Skittles there are. Okay, that's discrete, it's countable. But continuous would be the amount of sugar in that pack of Skittles. You can't count the amount of sugar, so we would call that a continuous quantitative variable. Categorical variables, as I said, are categories, right? So they divide subjects into groups based on common values or common characteristics. So again, that pack of Skittles, I could have you divide up the number of red, orange, yellow, and so on Skittles. So you're dividing them into those groups based on their colors. So feel free to pause the video and you can try the next two problems, problem number 4, and then we're going to take a look at letter, actually you can try 4A and B. It gives you some good practice on finding the W's and also listing whether they're categorical or quantitative. Okay, so once we have data, what is it that we, can do with this? So data, once it's in a table, it's organized for us. But a lot of times we can miss important features of the data just by looking at a table. So what we do is we make a picture, and those pictures look like graphs, okay? Our vision accounts for about 2/3 of electrical activity in your brain, and 50% of our neural tissue is related to vision. So it assists in learning and looking at patterns and seeing features that might be interesting. So making a picture is really important for understanding data. And there's lots of pictures we can create, lots of graphs we can create. However, there's certain graphs that are not appropriate for categorical variables, just like there are certain graphs that are not appropriate for quantitative variables. So, for instance, bar graphs, also known as bar charts, they would be used for categorical variables. I would never make a bar chart for quantitative, okay? Just like I would never make a box plot for categorical variables. Okay, box plots are only for quantitative, all right? So when we're creating these graphs, these displays, they describe what we call a distribution of a variable, okay? And it identifies all the possible values of the variable, and it tells how frequently each occurs. Okay, so we're going to make a bar chart, all right? And a bar chart is a display that's used to show the distribution of a categorical variable. And it shows the counts for each category in bars next to each other for comparison. Okay, now this activity is done in class, but I can give you an idea here. So let's pretend cell phone carriers, right? We've got AT&T, and we've got Verizon. Okay, and let's say T-Mobile, and then we'll say other, okay, in case I'm missing one. And so this is the carrier. And then we've got, let me move this down. And then we've got our counts. Okay, so I'm making a little frequency table here, which is very easy to make. All right, so let's pretend we had 5 people that had AT&T, 4 people that had Verizon, 1 person that has T-Mobile, and maybe 3 that have other. Okay, so when I'm making my bar chart, I notice that the highest number I have is 5. And I'm going to have my categories here. So I've got my counts on the left, and I've got my carriers now. It's important to label your horizontal axis. I've got my carriers along the bottom, okay? And what I would do is I would have my the names here. So I'm gonna have AT&T, and then I've got Verizon. Okay, I'll just call it VER. And actually, let's leave a space. So in bar charts, you don't have to put the bars next to each other. Okay. T-Mobile, and then we'll do other. Okay. So I know that AT&T is 5. So I'm gonna have a bar that goes up to 5. Okay, and I'm gonna shade that in. And then I've got Verizon is 4. Okay, I'll shade that in when I'm done. T-Mobile's 1, and other is 3. So what are some things that you can tell by looking at this display now? I can see that most people have AT&T, right? And the minority have T-Mobile. So again, you can take different categories like cell phone carrier, break it down into subgroups, and then create this graph. And you can leave spaces between the bars because they don't have to go in any specific order. I could have started the graph with other and then ended it with AT&T. Okay, but what is important is that you label everything. Okay, so some important things that we looked at here is what statistics is, which is the study of the world around us, and what statistics are, which are the calculations, right? The other important thing we talked about was data and how we take that data and organize it into tables and then be able to determine the W's that bring context to our data, right? And also don't forget how, along with the 5 W's. Okay. We looked at the who, which are the rows of the table, and the what, which are the columns. And the columns represent the variables. There's two types that we're looking at, which are categorical and quantitative. And one way that you can display categorical data is bar charts. I'm also going to add on here that you can also use pie charts in addition to bar charts. So pie charts, which are also known as circle graphs. Okay, and then another type is what we call segmented bar charts. So those are three important graphs. And again, you can only use those for categorical data. So that is the end of this lesson. Please make sure you take the time to complete the take it home. And at the end of the homework problems, there are answers for select problems, so not all of them. You don't need to complete every single problem. So, one strategy is you can look at the selected answers and just try those problems. Let's say you're completing one and you're getting it correct, then there might not be a need to try number two if it's an identical problem. So use the homework to your advantage, like whatever it is you need to make sure you review and practice. If you're looking at the answers and you're getting them all wrong, it means you need to spend a little bit more time practicing and trying some of the other problems. Okay. But you also need to get out of the mentality of my math lab where it would ask you to do problems, over and over. So you could keep practicing. This is a little bit different. It requires you to do some inquiry. And it's going to require you to stretch your brain a little bit, but that's important for you to understand statistics. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.